Better never to have been, this your parents didn't see, so they sent you down that road of misery. Didn't grasp asymmetry, failed to feel equality, didn't see that all they had was fantasy.
That was Matti Häyry at the Park Philosophy event in Finland, which happened in July earlier this year. He gave a talk on antinatalism titled No New People, No World, No Purpose, but in what order? It was a nice, long talk with many antinatalist songs interspersed in the middle, and this was one of them. But up until now, we did not know what Matti actually said because the recording was not available. Thanks to Amanda, we now have the recording uploaded on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. It's about 2 hours long, and the first half is where Matti, that's how they say his name with both T's pronounced, so he talks for the first half, and the second half was Q&A with really engaged audience and some very good questions. Matti talked about his own journey towards antinatalism, David Bennett's axiological asymmetry, a little bit about his reservation about that asymmetry, then the quality of life, and also the question of suicide, death, and extinction. Matti is known for his risk argument for antinatalism, which is the idea that the mere probability that something can go wrong in a child's life is enough for abstaining from creating that child. That was the subject of his A Rational Cure for Pre-Reproductive Stress Syndrome, published way back in 2004. And then there is this book he co-authored with Amanda, Antinatalism, Extinction, and the End of Procreative Self-Corruption. One of the main ideas of that book was how most of the Western philosophy was rather a reaction to the underlying antinatalist sentiment that has prevailed for centuries. He also talks about his philosophical rock opera of Orchid People and many other songs having antinatalist themes within them. In all of this, we come to know about the musician Matti and the vegan Matti, along with the philosopher Matti that he is. Looking at the Q&A, it was certain that the audience was fully engaged in the conversation and liked Matti's talk. So congratulations to Matti for this. Now the talk itself was in Finnish with some English songs in between. So it was a humongous job to translate and subtitle all of it properly in English, without which people like me would not have understood anything that was said. So thanks to Amanda along with Matti for doing this for us. And since we are talking about videos, Lawrence interviewed Sagor Islam, who is the creator of the film No Dice. No Dice is a short film with antinatalist theme. As you can see from the poster, it clearly says the gamble of procreation. The film itself is in Bengali but has been recognized internationally, winning awards at 2 Italian film festivals. Sagor tells that he is also submitting this to another film festival in Korea. Lawrence discusses various aspects about making the film, Sagor's inspiration, the audience's reaction, as well as the attitude of actors and the crew while making a film on such a pessimistic subject, and so on. They also talk about problems in launching the film on public streaming platforms and the prospects of putting it on YouTube, which is something I wish happened sooner than later, but for now we'll have to wait. Chris Williamson is a big channel with just under 4 million subscribers. There were 2 10-ish minute long videos of him talking to Alex O'Connor and Joe Folley on topics related to antinatalism and pessimism in general. The first one was on the dark philosophies, where they discuss Emil Cioran, Philip Mainlander, Arthur Schopenhauer, and Benatar. It is interesting that Alex distinguishes David Benatar from other pessimistic philosophers in the past. He says that pessimistic philosophers in general can be a little self-indulgent in their pessimism, but Benatar is a good example of exception to this. He describes Benatar as a non-self-indulgent pessimistic philosopher, which I completely agree with. I mean, David Benatar has taken some extreme measures to not personalize his arguments, to not get psychologized. The second video on the same channel, Is Pain of Life Worth the Pleasure, is more directly on antinatalism. Here, they talk about David Benatar's axiological asymmetry, the empirical asymmetry between negatives and positives of the real world, quality of life argument, Pollyanna principle, and so on. I think Alex confuses the consent argument that we ought not to impose suffering onto somebody to bestow benefits upon them without their consent as being Benatar's. This, I think, is Shauna Schifrin's proposal in her paper about wrongful life cases. Anyway, both videos are thoroughly enjoyable, not too long, and very interesting. Another big channel, Pursuit of the Wonder, made a video about Peter Wiesel-Zapfe and his philosophy. It nicely explains the analogy of overgrown antlers of Irish elk elk, which were the cause of its extinction and the overgrown consciousness of human minds. The Irish elk were not able to cut their antlers off, but humans, according to Zapfer, used four strategies to trim the overgrowth of their consciousness: isolation, anchoring, distraction, and sublimation. If we don't trim our consciousness like this, we would realize the futility of existence and of reproduction, resulting in the extinction of our species, just like that of Irish elk. There is also this contradiction in our desires. On the one hand, we desire the continuation of our species, but on the other hand, we desire solace. So, one is a desire of continuation, which requires us to run continuously, which is in contradiction to our desire to achieve calm. The video explains all of this nicely, but the ending had a disappointing optimism to it. Another big channel with almost 250,000 subscribers made a video talking about antinatalism in Indonesian language, but automatic dubbing is available so I could listen to it in English. It examines the antinatalist view through the logic of David Benatar, pessimism of Arthur Schopenhauer, human psychological biases, and its interaction with the Buddhist teachings of samsara and dukkha. Antinatalism not only rejects birth but also questions the meaning of existence, examines suffering as an inevitable part of life, and invites us to rethink the meaning of compassion. It concludes with an invitation to live with empathy, even though we recognize that not being born might have been the best possible condition. A new book, The Politics of Commitment Towards a Better Future for Humanity by Anthony Closey, will be published on 19th November. It doesn't look like it's directly on antinatalism. Looking at the table of contents, he talks about the arguments for having a future, arguments for extinction, and the limitations of the commitment that we ought to have to avoid extinction and how to overcome those limits. So, in fact, it is probably going to be a pro-natalist book, but at least it seems it is giving serious thought to the arguments for extinction. One more Spanish book on antinatalism was published in July earlier this year, and I think which we missed talking about. Titled Antinatalism, The Tragedy of Birth, the book proposes an anarchist perspective of antinatalism. This is part of the translated description, which says the true anarchist is not the one who throws stones at shop windows or the one who disguises himself as an anti-establishment in harmless protests. The true anarchist, the true enemy of the established order, is the one who dynamites the very core of the system, procreation. The true revolutionary is not the one who engenders slaves for capital, but the one who breaks the chain of pain by not bringing more beings to the slaughterhouse of this world. So, some strong words there, and I would be careful with words like dynamites. The book has 41 chapters covering many different topics of antinatalism, including a manifesto at the end. Although I have not read the book, I mean, it's in Spanish after all, but we should be careful with the strong language and words in it. Watermark is an annual scholarly journal published by graduate students in the Department of English at California State University. In its 2025 issue is a chapter, Nobody to Speak Of, Asexuality, Antinatalism, and Alternative Maternity in Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure by Erica Snellgrove. It talks about a novel, Jude the Obscure, by Thomas Hardy, published in 1895. The novel explores several social problems in Victorian England related to marriage, children, and sex. Erica points to the antinatalist themes in some parts of this novel. One of the main characters is the asexual lady Sue Bridehead. Yeah, that is a very creative last name for this context. Talking about Sue, Erica says, I intend to unite these two concepts, exploring how Sue's asexuality influences and is influenced by the antinatalism of the novel, and argue that their interplay ultimately leads to the advocacy for alternate forms of motherhood, including adoption and collective caretaking. Another funny name is Sue's adopted/stepson called Little Father Time. He innocently questions, but we don't ask to be born, to which Sue replies, no, indeed. And she recognizes procreative vanity when she exclaims, it seems such a terribly tragic thing to bring beings into the world, so presumptuous, that I question my right to do it sometimes. This is quite notable, considering that the novel was published in Victorian England, where marriage and children was almost a mandatory norm. In pronatalism this week, The Polish government has decided to fully exempt households raising two or more children from personal income tax. On October 16th, President Karol Nawrocki of Poland signed the Income Tax Exemption for Family with Two or More Children Act, which was proposed last August. However, there are concerns that the actual beneficiaries may be concentrated among high income households. The tax reduction effect would be limited for low income families who pay little or no income tax. Experts pointed out that while this measure may increase household income and stimulate consumption in the short term, its effect on raising the birth rate could be limited. And finally, sixth speaker for the Antinatalist Advocacy Conference 2025 was announced this week. That will be Jonathan Leighton. He is the executive director of the Organization for the Prevention of Intense Suffering, OPIS, and author of The Tango of Ethics, Intuition, Rationality, and the Prevention of Suffering. He has also appeared in the Exploring Antinatalism podcast episode 93, where he explained his project about prevention of intense suffering on a large scale. Jonathan will be speaking in this conference on tackling intense suffering. Only two more speakers to go. We'll find out who the seventh one is next week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.